All right, good evening, everybody. This is week 2 of the App Prep Seminar. My name is Joanne, and we are going to talk all about experience writing. So, experiences tend to get put on the back burner sometimes because, it's always about the personal statement. However, what we forget sometimes is that your personal statement is 5,300 characters, and your experience writing, if you add it all up, your 700 character descriptions plus your 3 meaningful at 1325. If you add all that up, that ends up being about 10,000 characters. So your experience writing is actually twice as long as your personal statement. And your experience writing is where you finally get to brag about all the things that you did. Because we're not bragging about the things you did in your personal statement. But your experience descriptions, that's 100%, look what I did. So this is the part, you've spent years building this experience list. This is a really important part of your application. And we want to spend a decent amount of time on this section. So I like to get this up and running within 2 or 3 sessions. But we're going to talk tonight about how to write these, and we'll look at some examples and of course answer all of your questions. So the big thing I want to stress with experience writing is every single thing you have done goes in your experience writing. And I'll sometimes people struggle with like coming up with 15 experiences. Now, first of all, I'm not saying that you have to have 15 experiences. There are people out there that say quality over quantity. I don't see any reason, like it's not that, if you have 14 or 13, you're never getting into med school. It's not like that. It's just that I find it hard to believe that you don't have 15 experiences. I don't think I've ever met anyone who doesn't have 15 experiences. Just because once you start really thinking about everything you've done over 4 or 5 years, most people have done 15 things. And it doesn't necessarily mean academic or clinical things. Um, every job you've had, even working at Subway over the summer, if you worked during college or before college, like the summer after your high school year or after college, even if you had to work 2 jobs and one of those jobs was, working at the movie theater, every single job you've done goes in your application. If you ended up having so many jobs that you have more than 15 experiences, that's when we start grouping things or leaving things out. But the reason why we want to include every little job you've had in your application is because um, if for people who didn't have to work throughout college, most of the time, those people who didn't have to work, they spend their time doing other things. And they often chose to do things like volunteering or doing more clinical experiences or research. But people who had to work, and if you were, I had to work throughout college. My first couple of years, I was working 40, 60 hours a week and going to college. And hopefully that wasn't any of you. But if it was, they need to know that you did that because that means those are hours spent working and not, playing video games or laying around. So they need to know what you did with your time. And if you had to work throughout college, even if it's seemingly an unrelated job, definitely put that in there. There's still value in every single thing you did. If you were a sandwich artist at Subway, you can make lots of parallel connections or you have lots of transferable skills from that job. Every club you joined, even if you weren't in it very long, or even if you didn't do very much, we'll find a way to make that meaningful. If you went to a conference, including like the UC Davis Pre-Health Conference, or you were part of an organization or like a pipeline program that prepared you for med school, all of that goes in your application. If you did research, your actual research is one experience. If you presented your research at a conference, that's a second experience. If you published your research, that's a third experience. So your research alone can have up to 3 experience descriptions. If you were part of an organization for multiple years and your job title changed, you can list each job title as a separate experience. And there are lots of strategies with combining. Sometimes you would want to do that, and sometimes you wouldn't want to do that. It just depends on how many experience you have. I want everyone here to have one hobby. So you can be thinking about what you're going to put as your hobby, just one. And if you're a musician or an artist, you can put that as an artistic endeavor. And I do want you to put if you've been a musician your whole life and played an instrument since childhood, I do want you to put that down. That is a valuable thing to med schools. So, um, any questions about the types of things that could go into your application? No questions? I always get a question about sororities and fraternities. Nobody wonders about that. Okay. What about mission trips? Anybody worried about that? All right. No questions. Okay. Then I shall go on.
In the chat, I have a question and somebody else asked a question.
Oh, sorry. I
Um,
didn't look at the chat. Let me
no
take.
worries.
Okay. Would you be against doing two hobbies? It depends on what the hobbies are. So if you had two random things like hiking and baking, I would just combine them and put them as one. If one of your hobbies is like ice skating and you were a professional ice skater and you have competed throughout most of your life, I would put that as its own. So it kind of depends on to what degree your hobby is.
I see. Thanks.
What about so people are often afraid to put down their sororities or fraternities because they think that there's a lot of stigma associated with them. And surely there is some stigma associated with them, but I promise you that a lot of the physicians that will be screening your app were probably in fraternities or sororities, and these people who are reading your apps are probably in their 50s or 60s, and they have or had children who are college age, and their children were probably in sororities and fraternities. So if you were in a sorority and fraternity, fear not, you are in good company in medicine. That is a very common thing in yeah, in that world. So I don't think you have anything to worry about with that. You just wanna be careful about how you're describing it, right? You don't wanna put anything red flaggish in there. Is there such a thing as a basic hobby, like reading? Yeah, there is actually. So I don't wanna see hobbies like reading, cooking, exercising, because in my opinion, these are, just basic living things. So everybody has to eat, so you really wouldn't put cooking as a hobby unless you cook for other people or you cook and you donate the food or something like that. Like, it needs to be a little extra. So if you cook and you host dinner parties and people come over and you make big meals, that's a little different because 'cause you're focusing more on, the community aspect of cooking. But just cooking yourself meals is I don't think unless it's, like, something really extreme, like you've picked a certain kind of food and you really go all out and it's, like, really elaborate and you have more details to include. Um, but just saying I like to try new foods, I don't think is a hobby. Um, 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 Thoughts on video games? I think that's a little risky. There are some older people who do have a lot of stigma about video game players. At least they did a few years ago. I remember when I was on the admissions committee and there were some gamers, and some of them were actually like professional gamers, and the older people, I remember like the 60 plus year olds, like they just did not understand it. They did not understand what that meant to be a professional gamer, and they didn't understand why someone would put video games on a med school application. They just were really put off by that. Now, it's been 10 years, so maybe things have changed, but in my experience, older people are still older people who oftentimes don't understand a lot of this stuff, so that would be my only fear with that, is you'd have to get the right person to read your app, and that's something we can't control. If you started your own org, that's cool. I mean, you would put that in there. I don't know why you wouldn't do that. How about something like church? Oh yeah, that's 100% okay. Lots of people are Sunday school teachers or they volunteer at their mosque or their temple. That's perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with that. Great questions. I don't think attending, sorry to clarify, attending church I wouldn't put, but if you had a leadership role or you like playing like if you were part of the band at church, like a lot of people have talked about playing in music at church. Like as long as you've done something extra and some type of leadership role, I think I would put that down. Okay, so for every experience that you have, you're gonna fit it into one of these categories. And this is called the type. Now, people get really stressed out about this. They are afraid, they're miscategorizing it. Here's the thing. There's no like this is not part of the screening process to make sure you categorize your experiences correctly. I really don't think the people reading your app are going to sit and analyze this. They're not going to go, oh my God, this experience description actually is community service non-medical, but they put it as medical. So therefore, they're not going to make a good doctor one day, and I'm going to stop reading their app right now. Like that's not going to happen. These guys are reading your app really fast and they're just not thinking about it that way. So my best advice is to use your best judgment. Um, so if you did community service and it's not with patients, it's not medical. Or if you were with patients, but you weren't taking their vitals or you weren't updating their medical records, you were, let's say, educating them about their diet or um, handing out flyers, that would be non-clinical because you weren't doing anything clinical. So you just have to use your best judgment there. I will say that most schools do like a lot of community service. So sometimes people have done it, like let's say a student run clinic, and let's say they had two job titles. And one of the jobs was really about intake. You did intake, took the history, you did their vitals. So you could split that experience and devote some of the hours to your medical clinical volunteering. Um, and put your job title as that. And then let's say the next year you were the director, on the board of managing the clinic, then that would go under leadership. And then you would talk about leadership from that experience. Um, if you just cannot, obviously I'll be there along your side while you're doing this, so I can certainly help you, but I'm ultimately gonna like just tell you to pick one because it's not that serious. Things like publications versus posters. If you were presenting, then it's a presentation. If you attended a presentation, then it's a conference. Sometimes people get confused about that. If you did social justice or advocacy work, advocacy it's really broadly defined, but it could be as simple as like marching in a protest. It could also be being in a role where your job is primarily like calling service organizations that provide like meet basic needs. So you get to choose in your experiences how you classify these things. But let's just say you classify something as social justice advocacy, then the focus of that description needs to be on that aspect. Same with leadership. If you list it as leadership, then you need to talk about a leadership component of the description and not talk about your clinical components. The descriptions need to align with the heading, with the type. Questions about that?
I just had a question about the advocacy work because I know there are some hot topics right now that can sway application, I guess viewers. How do
Do you know that, or is that what you think?
I'm that's what I'm thinking.
Okay. So you're
But I
talking
don't
about like abortion?
yeah.
Okay. I've had people who've literally worked in abortion clinics get into med school.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I don't think it's what you're thinking at all. I think that you can do anything you want. You can talk about anything you want. It is really just a matter of if you are very, very afraid of saying you did something and you don't want to put it in your app, cool. Like that, you can do that. You can just leave stuff out. There's no rule saying you have to put every single thing you've done in your app. But if you wanna tell them, but you're just afraid, then I would say you have to get over yourself because why are you afraid of what you did? If you did it, you shouldn't have been afraid, right? You should be proud of what you did. So I think if you did everything because you wanted to, then you're presenting to the schools who you are as a person. And the schools should take you for who you are. If you're afraid of who you are, if you're afraid who you are isn't a good fit for medicine and the med schools won't like you based on who you are, then you have a bigger problem, right? You're going to go into a field where you can't ever be yourself. So that's a problem, right? We wouldn't want that. So I think you have to ask yourself like whose side are the med schools on? Are the med schools on the side of anti-social justice or are they on the side of, patient autonomy and rights? And, you know, that probably depends on the school. But please don't worry about like the Jesuit schools. Like if you're thinking, oh, I can't apply to Loyola or Creighton because they're a Jesuit school and I did stuff with abortion. That is so not the case. Like they really, really don't care. I promise. Okay, so with your experience writing, you have 15 spots for AMCAS and AACOMAS is unlimited. So we're gonna start with your AMCAS and do that one first, and then we'll add on with AACOMAS. So it's the things you had to combine with AMCAS because you had more than 15, we can break out and write more for AACOMAS. So I always like to start with just simply numbering 1 through 15 and starting to list every single thing you've done since high school. No, there's no minimum number of hours. You can have 2 hours and that's fine. Um, so everything since graduating high school, the summer after high school, you can put in here, and of course, including your jobs. And so 15 spots get 700 characters each. And I want to go through this all. And then for 3 of those 15, you have an additional 1325 characters to answer the question, what was the transformative nature of this experience? How did it change you? So for those 3 experiences, the meaningful experiences, those are additional boxes. Those are not in addition to the 700. You write your 700 characters separate, and then you write a different 1325 character paragraph that is not connected to the 700 characters. That's a big thing. Every year I say this, and then people will send me their experience descriptions and they'll be all combined. So please remember that and write 2 different boxes. Okay, so for AACOMAS, it's 600 characters. So after we write your 700 characters and we have them perfect and they're all done, I will go through and edit them down to 600. Sometimes it happens that people underwrite, like they don't write enough. And if you send me a document that has like all of your character descriptions at like 5 something, I'm going to be like, just quickly make a copy of this because this is going to save us time later for AACOMAS. But most often it happens that people overwrite, meaning they send me descriptions that are like 800 and we have to cut them down. So we usually cut them down to 700, and then after we're done, then we'll go back through and cut them down to 600. And the easiest way to do that is just pick a sentence and take it out. They're going to be such little bodies of writing that it's really hard you can't be very descriptive in them. So it's really hard to cut from each sentence. It's easier just to take a sentence out. And what we're thinking about here, so this whole application, you get to manage what this person who's reading it thinks about you. You are in control of how people understand you. So this whole thing is impression management. So for each of your 15 experiences, I want you to think about this as like Mary Poppins. I don't know if all of you have seen Mary Poppins, but it's about a nanny and she's a magical nanny and she has this little bag that she takes with her into different people's homes. And when she opens the bag, things pop out of it that are helpful to her in those situations. So I want you to think about your takeaways from these experiences as the objects in your little magic bag, because the takeaways are things that you're putting in your bag that you're going to carry with you into medicine that you can open up one day, and these lessons will be really valuable to you in your future. So these takeaways are things that you can carry with you into medicine and use again. So you're going to have 15 experiences to highlight what are 15 takeaways that you bring with you to medicine that are so useful for you. You get to manage that, right? When you're writing your 700 characters, you want to have an idea of what you took away from that experience while you're writing it because it's leading into that takeaway. We're not writing stories here. We're writing what did you do with the first opening sentence, and then we're working with each sentence, building on maybe zooming into what specifically you did. And we're also thinking about those competencies. I'm going to show you again, I'll show you examples of what that looks like, but it's not as complicated as people often make it out to be because you're just writing what you did. I think when people try to write stories, it becomes far more complicated. And I think it's, in my opinion, really impossible to write a full story in a 700 character paragraph. What ends up happening is you just give a snippet of a story about a person who isn't you, and then you don't really understand what you did in the experience. You just learned something about a person. So that's why we're not writing stories. The last sentence is always going to be the takeaway. What did you learn? And just so I can reiterate to you, the takeaway is not going to be this reaffirmed my desire to be a doctor. So we already know you want to be a doctor because you applied. So the takeaway is going to be something else about you, something maybe a little more helpful to them. Questions so far?
For this story versus description thing, are are you saying we wouldn't really be writing stories for the EO school application more, or is that what you're saying? Or is it okay to write stories for the AAMC application?
I'm saying for the 700 and 600 character descriptions, we're not writing stories.
Okay, gotcha. But the other one it's okay too, like for the meaningful experiences one.
Yep, we're going to talk about that next. So that one is a story, but the 700, not a story. There is a person out there in the universe who's the only person in the universe telling people to do this, and nobody on Earth agrees with him except for himself. So he's the only one telling people to write stories, and every person I've ever talked to besides him thinks that's a bad idea. So I'm constantly trying to counter that narrative. So we are not writing stories. If you want to write stories, I would say you might need to get help elsewhere because I'm not going to agree with that. So additional 1325 characters for your 3 meaningful. These are stories. And the whole idea here is we're not really tying this back to medicine. Like at the end of this paragraph, we're not saying, oh, I'm going to be an excellent doctor because of this. We're just simply focusing on you as a human being. How did that experience change you? And so a nice way to think about this is like, think about yourself on the first day of that experience and compare yourself to the last day. What was the significant growth that occurred within you? And I bet you had a few things that grew, right? So you get to choose which ones you're highlighting for the med schools. Now, a cool way to think about this is if you are deliberate about which things you're showing about yourself, which 3 ways you've changed, because if you've changed, surely you've grown in this area, right? So let's say one way you grew was in your confidence handling conflict. Let's say another way you grew was in your public speaking, and another way you grew was your problem solving skills through research. So we name these 3 things. Now go back and look at your personal statement and look at the 3 things you're taking away from your personal statement. We want to obviously make sure they're not the same things. We're not taking away the same uh, takeaways. If you name them, if you name all 3 of your takeaways from your personal statement, all 3 of your takeaways from your meaningfuls, put them on the paper, write them out on a paper together and look at them together. This is the impression this person is getting of you. Together, do these things make sense? And more than likely they will. They're just lots of different things about you. But I like people to do that really basic activity because that really forces you to be intentional about how you're teaching others about yourself. So that will be something we do after you've already written your meaningful. But even for your 15, one activity that you can do to make sure that you're doing it right, write out your experiences, go through and label them, label the competency you want to highlight or the takeaway, the thing that you really want them to understand about you. Then hand your experiences to someone else and say, can you write the word that you understand about me from this experience? Make them write something next to each experience. If they don't write the same thing you wrote, then you didn't write it very well. So you have to go back and be like, okay, how did they come up with that? I need to manage my writing better so I can make sure they land at the takeaway I want them to get. You're managing how they understand you. Okay, let's look at some examples. And I'm going to also focus a little bit on some technical stuff here. So in this, I blurred out, I whited out all the details of the people. So normally we would have all of their contact information in the title and all of that. So let's see. First thing I want to highlight, your experience name is your title. So these are actually wrong because I would want this to say volunteer, not non-clinical volunteering, because that's the type. So your title or the experience name is your title of the experience. So your title within the experience. What else? Okay, so looking on the right side of the box, I just wanted to highlight if you had done something for a long period of time, you can break those out into 3 different timelines. And a lot of people do this, especially for projected hours, and I'll show you that in a second. The hours people often stress about getting the hours right. I mean, no one honestly is checking you for this. There's no verification of your hours. However, if you overindulge in that, it it's possible if you overdo it that they could go, well, that seems strange. How could they do that many hours during that time frame, while they're doing these other things? That seems a little unrealistic. There's really no reason to overindulge with your hours because literally no one cares how many hours you did. Uh, if I could wish one thing on the pre-med population is that you could let go of this obsession with your hours. I have no idea where this came from because I've never heard a med school like really stress that go like we're really needing X number of hours and this and this. Now PA school does. PA school actually holds people accountable and they can get denied for not having enough hours. But med schools, I've never heard a med school do that. Aside from community service, some schools screen on community service, but the number is like 50. I've asked the schools that screen and they're like, yeah, it's like 50 hours. So, people are trying to get like hundreds of hours and it's just not necessary. So let's see here. For hobbies, oh, just take a look and read this top one. I want to see what you think about it. What do you notice about the first description? Yep, it's combined. So this person had multiple volunteer experience. They just grouped two together. Perfectly fine. Anything else you noticed about the way it's written?
Very to the point.
Yeah, it's clearly like what did they do? But look at the very last line. So both volunteer experiences afforded me the opportunity to connect with people who come from different backgrounds. That is something that we always want to highlight if we can. Working with people different from ourselves is extremely valuable in this process. So if you have the option, do that. And then the other thing I like is where we quantify things. So, working with 40 adults, 10 children, quantifying hours, anything where we can be really specific like that. It helps them understand the degree to which you did whatever. It helps them picture it. And then let's look at the second one. People often ask, how do I talk about my hobbies? So in this case, you have the option to put contact name and email. You can opt out of that. That's an optional field. So if you're doing your hobby, just remove that option. So in this case, this was blank for her. It wasn't there. And for the organization name, she just put herself. So I'll let you read the hobby description. What competency does this hobby show?
Resilience.
Hmm. Yep. Even in hobbies, we can manage to make it meaningful, right? And the thing I like most about this is the very last sentence. If you're going to do a hobby, the whole point of a hobby to a med school, they actually are not really that interested in getting to know you. They'll say that, but that's not the point. The point is that you have hobbies so that they know you are a cool, easygoing person who knows how to relax. I have met people who tell me, I'll be like, how do you have fun? And they'll say, well, I think working in the research lab is fun. I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. Like, no, you don't understand. They want you to have things outside of work that you enjoy. So that's why I mandate that you have a hobby and it hopefully is a hobby you can carry with you in different places. When we get into interview prep, you'll hear me be careful about the hobbies you share. Like, for example, I was interviewing a person for a school in Utah And I said, what do you do for fun? And he was going on and on and on about surfing. And I'm like, okay, new hobby. We're not surfing in Utah. So pick a different one. And he was like, okay, hiking. That makes more sense for Utah. Your hobby needs to be something you can do in the place you're going to. Now, I'm not saying like don't say snowboarding because you can't snowboard in all places, but it's okay. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is okay. I'm just in general, like when we're interviewing, we want to try to tailor our interests to the place that we're going to. You probably can snowboard in almost every place, actually. I'm sure every place has some kind of slope. Oh, there's a question in the chat. Um, yeah, you can put more than 10,000 hours. I think this might have just defaulted because she left it blank. Sometimes people leave their hours and hobbies blank because they don't know how to calculate them, which is perfectly fine. I think you can also just put 0. Um, I don't, or she might have typed in 999. I don't remember. But it didn't obviously have any effect on this person because I think she had over 10 interviews. So I think it's okay. Even if you just put that. Oh gosh, where did it go? I really hate my mouse. Okay. People sometimes ask me how to talk about research, and I just wanted to include a research description so maybe we have a good example. So I'll let you read that. Very specific takeaway, right? But in this case, this is what she took away from this particular experience. So that's perfectly fine. A lot of times for research takeaways, there's something to the effect of learning about the trial and error process, learning that failure is part of the process of learning. Sometimes people learn how, if they're doing clinical research, much how much more diversity is needed in patient participation and wanting to do something about that. Um, it doesn't matter what your research takeaway is as long as it's something personal that you carry with you. Do they contact the people listed in the experiences? It's not that they do, it's that they can. You want to be as honest as you can about the people, but I highly doubt they have time to call everybody. I think the only time they would call is if you were a strong candidate, they really liked you, but they just had some weird doubt about you for some reason. If there was some issue with like if you had a red flag in your app, then they could call you. Um, this is a terrible story. I'm so sorry to have to tell you, but I know a I know a person who honestly gave the med schools a really hard time, and they were trying to get rid of her, meaning they accepted her, they were trying to defer her, they were trying to withdraw her, rescind her, I can't talk tonight, rescind her acceptance. So what they did was they called every single person on her experience list to confirm the details of her experience because they were trying to catch her doing something wrong so they could rescind her acceptance. She found out because all the people started telling her that they were calling and confirming. It was a whole thing. So can they? Yes. Do they? Not usually. You need to give them some reason to do that. Hopefully that doesn't happen to anybody here because you guys are all very nice people who don't have any issues. Okay. Um, oh, people often ask me about awards and honors, how to write them. Sometimes people just list them. They just list the dates and the award. I thought this one was written pretty well in terms of like making it meaningful. So you can take a look at that. This, that last line is nice. It kind of usually, like I said, for honors and awards, it's just the dean's list. That's what most people have. If you don't have like major awards, that's okay. Just list your dean's, even if you were 1/4, just list it. If you have more than 15 experiences and you're looking to cut, this is going to be one of the first things we cut. They can tell your grades by your grade list. So this isn't necessary. If you don't have 15, then this is a nice way to add one more thing about you. So that last line, the last two lines, look, she got to work in a little bit about like balancing multiple jobs. Just a reminder that she did do that. We're kind of sneaky in that way. Okay. I wanted to show you in this one how we project hours out. So in a lot of cases, people will start new experiences while they're doing their secondaries or right when they're submitting their primary. Actually, that's more appropriate. They'll start new experiences as they're submitting their primary. So you can see this person started the job in June, right after they started or they submitted. So you can see how they did this. They had you have to in order to add an experience, the first date has to be May of that year. So for you all, the date has to be May of 2024 or before, the completed date. But you can put anticipated dates, which is going to start the next month, and you can project it all the way out till July of the next year when you're supposed to start med school. So in this case, this person did 0 hours in May. It's clear they started in June. That's perfectly okay. I don't know how much, weight this experience is really going to have because it's all hypothetical. I will be doing this. I will be doing that. It would be better for this person maybe if they had more than 15 experiences to wait and add this in the secondary when they ask you, what are you doing over the next year, and use it as an update later. But if you didn't have 15 experiences and you wanted to take it up to 15, this is one way you can do it, is add what you're going to be doing. Any questions about that? No? Okay. And then I have an example of a meaningful down here. Yeah, I'll let you read that. Oh, the one thing I want to point out about this. So you notice in the last line, it indicates his publication. Sometimes if you want to sacrifice characters on the description, you can actually include the IOE, what is the IOE number? Am I saying that right? Well, I'm having a brain fart. The whatever, the publication number, or you can put the whole, and most people don't put the whole citation, it's way too much, but you can somehow indicate that you've been published in that. Or if you don't want to waste characters, you can just say I was published. But let's read the meaningful description. Okay, so his takeaway was, again, about failures in research and ways to approach the problem in the future. Very, very specific takeaway that obviously he can open up his bag and pull that out in the future and use it for the rest of his life. So the question about acronyms and numbers. I don't have a problem with people using, I mean, you do it if you need to cut characters. That's, at the end of the day, it always boils down to characters. I've seen lots of people use numbers. I don't think the med schools care at all about that. And now EMT, COVID, RN. Is there anybody here who doesn't know what one of those mean? If you don't know, please say I don't know. If you don't know what EMT, COVID, or RN means. Okay, my guess is that everybody knows what that means, especially the doctors reading your application. So there's no point in wasting characters to say emergency department when you can just say ED. That is my philosophy on that. If I'm reading something and I don't know what you're talking about, then I'm going to ask you. And if I have to ask you, that is a good indication that you probably maybe need to spell it out. Now, I'm not saying I know everything, but I've read enough of these over the last 9 years that I know a lot of things. I know a lot of acronyms. I know what a lot of this stuff means. So, yeah, if I don't know what it means, then you probably do. Now, look at this person. This person literally killed it this season. Like, he had so many interviews. He got into all of his top choices, and he acronymed Mass Gen. He acronymed PCR, which I don't know what else. You can't really write out PCR. He did PI, GI. I mean, this thing is jam packed full of acronyms. So yeah. Let's see. Did anybody else do it? I don't know. You all will find that I'm pretty chill about most of this kind of like nitty-gritty stuff. Like, this is not the stuff that's going to keep you out of med school, whether you write a number or not. I don't get lost in those details because that is not what matters. If you don't have a takeaway, I'm going to say something, right? If you are just completely, saying over and over, this reaffirmed my desire to be a doctor, I'm going to say something. So there are bigger issues, bigger fish to fry than your acronyms. Okay, I put a document in the group for this. No, it wasn't this class, it was for the main group, the 24-25 group. I can try to find it and put it in this class's group. It was a Google Doc that has an outline for all of this. And you can use that if you don't have one already, but this is essentially what you're going to have in your document. So when you set your document up, if you're working with me, what I would like is to have all this information filled out and then put your character count at the end of your descriptions. So you're going to have all of your descriptions and written out, your 700 characters, and your meaningful are going to go right under your 700 in a separate paragraph, and you'll have your character counts under all of them. Now, do I expect you to have this done at this point? Absolutely not. Most people are just now starting to write these. So if you haven't started writing them, you're fine. This is like right now is a good time to start thinking about getting started on that. So what that looks like is just writing out maybe 3 or 4. If you're meeting with me on a regular basis, let me see some of them before you keep going. I can maybe if you're off track, I can kind of, correct you, get you back on track, and then you finish them out, and then I can keep doing it, keep working with you on those. If you're doing this on your own, then I would say focus on, writing them all out and then setting them aside for a few days and coming back and reading them again. Usually, it takes a couple of read throughs to get them perfect because this is a lot of detail in a very small space. So we want to be really crafty with our word choice. If you're struggling with getting your descriptions under 700 characters, the art is really just like looking at the words and going, okay, can I say the same thing with less words? Can I replace 3 words with 1 word? You have to scrutinize every single word in that, every character, and ask yourself, is this necessary? And for a lot of them, we'll actually get it down to exactly 700 or 699, because people have a hard time cutting these down. Let's see, what else can I tell you about experiences? What questions do you have for me? Ended a little early tonight, last time we went over.
Joanne, going back to the hours that you showed us for one of those activities, listed May to May 0 for an anticipated activity.
Mhm.
Is the reason they did that because the system won't allow you to put anything that is going to be started after the primary's already in?
No, I think they could have started on May 1st and gained hours in May. So if you would have started May 1st and you put from May to May, you could have put what, 160 hours, and then picked up from June and take away or go from there. I think they just hadn't started yet. But the system won't let you start in June. You have to start in May. So that was their workaround. So are you asking me the difference between the personal statement and activity section? Is that the question? I'm guessing so. So your personal statement is the personal statement is answering the question, what is the value that you bring to medicine, while showing why you want to be a doctor and how you want to be a doctor. So it's all about medicine, right? It's like, I did this thing, you're telling a story about something you did with the purpose of showing how it relates back to your future in terms of what you want to do in your future. The experience descriptions are going to be a lot less about medicine. They're going to be more about you as a person. So I did this thing and I grew in this way, or I learned this. It's not about how it makes you want to be a doctor. If we go back and look at those experience descriptions, I think I pulled from like 5 or 6 different people for those. You really didn't see the word physician in any of that writing. It was all about just what they learned. TMDSS is shorter. I think it's 500 characters. I really dislike writing those. It's so hard to say what you did in 500 characters. Yeah, it's terrible. For non-trads and those with over 15 experiences, any advice for which activities to pick? Yeah, I think starting with recent is good. I think we kind of have to go through, and I like to look at all of them and then think about who you are, and or more like, how do you want the schools to understand you? So there are probably some experiences that most accurately define who you are as a person, and the ones that seem kind of random, that don't have a lot to do with who you are today, even though they were part of your life, they may not be who you are today. It's not relevant anymore. And if you really have to cut something, I would say cut the ones that are no longer relevant to you. For prepping to work with you, should we list every experience possible and you'll help us whittle it down? Yeah, and that's fine if you, especially if you're not sure which ones. Here's the thing, I've caught so many people, they're like, I don't know, somehow it comes up where I'll ask questions and it turns out they did this really amazing thing, and then they say, well, I didn't include that because I didn't think it was relevant. And I'm like, oh my God, yeah, it's perfect. It's exactly what they're looking for. So if you have too many and you're just not sure, there's no harm in letting me see all of them, and maybe I agree with you, you know? But sometimes I think sometimes you all are so close to yourselves and so close to your own experiences that you maybe don't see how significant they could be. Yeah. Yes, Joseph, you have a question? You have a question? I see a hand up. Go for it. I am not sure if you're muted, but I cannot hear you. Whenever you're ready, you can jump in and ask. Let me see a different question. Yep, you are muted. Can you unmute? You should be able to unmute. Okay. Question. Niched, somewhat personal. What about some experiences that we did in high school that carried over or are relevant to academic science? Yeah, that's actually a really great question. If you started something in high school and you continued it into college, then it's perfectly fine to list it, and you would start or the original date back in high school. That shows the longevity. So that's perfectly fine. Also, I think a different question is if you have college credit for your experience, which I don't think is what you're asking, but that's a legitimate question. So if you get in there and you read the fine print of the AMCAS document, every year they put out a handbook for applicants, which is really great. You should download it. It actually says in there that if you got course credit for an experience, you're not technically supposed to use that as an experience. You can't double dip, in other words. But I will say that every year people get research credit for their research and they still list it in their experience description. Like that's a rule that we don't really follow. It's very common for people to do that. Same with like global or study abroad, global learning. If you studied abroad, you obviously got credit for studying abroad. So we're not focusing on the coursework that you took, we're focusing on the cultural immersion and the experience you had traveling abroad versus the classes you took. What if you have an experience that you only did once or twice, but you feel like you want to do something like this in the future? Um, that's perfectly fine. Like people write experience descriptions about running a marathon and they only did that once. People talk about like one-day events that they were part of, like running a conference is a one-day event. So I think that's fine. I've never really had an issue with how long you did something. I would say your takeaway needs to be impactful. So the thing you talk about, you want it to be as reflective, deep, honest as you can. If it's really good, the takeaway is really good. Um, I could care less how long you did it. Teaching kids, yeah, that's great. I mean, as long as you have a reflective takeaway. Oftentimes people are enamored with their own experiences, meaning they think what they did was really important and really special. And so they want to use their experience description to promote the experience. They want to tell us how prestigious this lab was or how competitive it was to get this thing or how cool the clinic is. And if you do that, now all I know is that the place you worked is really cool, but I have no idea why I should pick you. So try to resist the urge to promote your experience. You are promoting yourself because you are applying to med school, right? All right, regarding listing activities starting from summer before college, if we were working at a job that we had been at since freshman year of high school, do we put the year starting the freshman year? The starting year, so the year, your freshman year in high school. So the whatever year you started your experience is when you put as your starting. And then you would just put the finish year, whatever that is, your freshman year. Yep. Other questions? You're asking really good questions tonight. These are the kinds of questions you should be thinking about right now. When we get into the application, I'm going to get into the really particular nitty gritty, like how you enter things and my pet peeves with that. So that one will be one you want to save, record, or I'll send you the recording and you'll want to watch it closer to May when you're actually filling out your application. But there's really specific ways that I want you to enter things in your experience description for AMCAS. But I'm not going to do that tonight. That's later towards the end. Probably the last session we'll go through AMCAS together.
Quick question. How often have you noticed primaries kind of overlapping with secondaries on what you've discussed?
Not literally the same rating, but the taught like the experiences, you can definitely use different stories from them.
Okay.
That's really common.
Okay, thank you.
The same thing with your meaningful. So you can use the same experience in your personal statement and your meaningful. That is really common. You're just not going to tell the same story because you're actually talking about two different things, right? In your personal statement, you're showing um, how what you did and how that led to you wanting to do medicine in a certain way. And in your meaningful, you're showing something you did that changed you in some fundamental way. So it's perfectly fine to do that. Can you put a scribing experience under shadowing? Not if you were paid. That would be a paid experience. I'm not sure why, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but I'm not sure why anyone would want to put something under shadowing. Scribing is 10 times better than shadowing. Like scribing is actually doing something, whereas shadowing is standing on the side watching someone work. So scribing is low level, low cognitive level functioning, right? Like you don't have to do anything. It would be much better to choose an activity where you're actually doing something. A lot of med schools don't prefer shadowing because there's no critical thinking involved. So, just my 2 cents on that. I know you mentioned hours don't matter, but does that also apply to most meaningful experiences? Yes, I think it applies. I think that's the answer to the question. It does not matter. I don't even know if I've ever paid attention to that, to be honest. I don't think I've ever even noticed how many hours people have. So this obsession that people have with hours, it comes from very stereotypical pre-med culture, which comes from some source that I'm not like I don't know the exact source. It could be the deep dark web on SDN. It could be Reddit. It could be some other big influencer that's pushing this. I know there's a big push like during COVID for shadowing, there was a big push that shadowing was so important. And the reason why shadowing suddenly became so important is because a lot of these companies created e-shadowing programs where the more people who watched their e-shadowing programs, the more they got paid, because obviously with social media, the more you get viewers, the more money you make. So of course, if you're going to get paid for the number of viewers for an e-shadowing program, the more you're going to say shadowing is important. Does that make sense? So you got to remember, like, there are certain things that are out there that there's always a reason why they're out there. It's not not everything you hear and you read is based on in truth or in reality. Do med schools like for you to see a doctor work? Yes. Do you need to have hundreds of hours of shadowing to be a good pre-med? No, absolutely not. It would be a million times better for you to work and do something than to stand there watching people. Okay, I'm not going to say any more about that. Maybe a little some other time. Okay, any other questions about anything?
I just had a general question. The more I speak to med students and just people who have ties in the South, and I'm from the South, I've noticed that a lot of the politics are shaping the way med schools can educate their students. Have you noticed a shift in more students applying to more liberal or northern schools versus southern, and is that causing like an influx that you haven't seen before, where it may be a little harder to get into certain schools versus others? I don't know if I'm sharing that correctly. My brain is.
I get your question. There are some schools that can't teach people how to about, let's say, what am I trying to say? Not why am I trying to, I can't think.
Like OB-GYN, I know is
Or
affected
birth control.
yeah.
Yeah, so I just cannot think of the word for it for some reason.
Yeah.
So first of all, just to be clear, no med school teaches people how to do abortions. That's never taught in
Right.
so that you don't have to worry about. You
Right.
learn that when you're doing a fellowship in OB-GYN. Now, where you do your residency and fellowship would probably have more of an impact on your type of care. So for example, if you're in a state that has banned gender affirming care, you wouldn't want to do, and that's your area of interest, you wouldn't want to do your residency in that state because yeah, you're not going to get the type of training that you want. I think that would have more of an effect at that stage. In med school, we had some med students come one time and some of them went to Jesuit schools like Georgetown and Loyola. It was really interesting because they both said that yes, the school is prohibited from teaching because it's a Catholic university about that particular topic. However, what ends up happening is they have programs outside of the curriculum. They have like nightly presentations and workshops, and they bring in guest speakers So the students find ways around it. They just bring in physicians to lecture and teach about things that aren't necessarily in the curriculum, but they're still getting access to that education.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, in terms of seeing trends, I'll be really honest with you. Every year, about 80% of my applicants are from California, and they don't apply to the southern schools for the most part. So I haven't seen any trend with that. I had a person this year from Alabama. I don't know if he cared. He got into all the Alabama schools, but I think if you're from the South, you know best what schools you want to go to, which ones you want to avoid for various reasons. So I would just say you should choose based on where you feel most comfortable, but I don't think it's affected my applicants at all. I have had people who literally say to me, I'm not applying to any school in any state that has this particular law, not being too specific there. And I'm just like, that's ridiculous. Like you can't, so that narrows it down to like 5 states because this law is now pervasive across the country. And I think if you're really limiting yourself based on that, it's going to be hard for you. I think the whole goal is to get into med school, and you have, in my opinion, you need to be a little bit more flexible, especially when the law has no impact on your medical education. Now, there are maybe other reasons you don't want to go to the state for personal reasons that may affect you, but I just don't. I don't know. I think we have to have a conversation about what that looks like. But most of the people, like I said, most people I apply to are not applying to Kentucky, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi. There aren't enough schools down there that would take out of state people anyway to make it worth their while.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, that wasn't even talking to you, Michaela, anymore. I'm just going on about
Oh,
just random rambling. Cool. Okay, so any last questions? Okay. Well, thank you all for hanging out to the very end. If you have any other questions, please join us tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Central. I shared the link in the group. I will carry on about whatever you want me to carry on about tomorrow. Bring your questions and have a good evening. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome.